Alright, some of you might want to lay down on a pinball machine because y'all about to get tilted. Alright, so today we're going to talk about journalism because everyone seems to hate it and some people don't seem to understand what it is, so good old PattyJack is gonna tell ya. Now, what makes me qualified to tell you? Well, I have a diploma in digital communications, and I've worked in the radio and print industry, as well as doing a bunch of freelance online video and writing for various websites. So before we totally get into it, I want to address the reason that I'm talking about this, and that stems from the entire Alex Mauer situation, as well as the coverage that the story has received on the internet. Now, I covered the story a couple weeks ago, but there's been so many updates since then that I really don't know where to start with it. So I really just kind of let the entire thing play out, and I'll make a video going over the conclusion to it once that happens at some point, but for the most part, I just couldn't be bothered to focus on, like, that exclusively, so I've kind of let it do its own thing. That being said, there's been some very prominent YouTubers and games media websites covering the story to a varying degree of success and or accuracy. So in short, there were two recent articles published about the Alex Mauer situation by Destructoid and Ars Technica. The articles were both on the short side, and for the most part they just detailed what was going on the legal side of the battle between Alex Mauer and Leonard French, who is representing Imago Softworks. However, there was a variety of information that was misrepresented or flat out not included when talking about the story. This includes, but is not necessarily limited to, Alex Mauer DMCAing various YouTubers, over 70 of them in fact, as well as throwing temper tantrums on the internet, sending death threats to people, including the lawyer in the prosecution against her, and a heck of a lot of the other events that have been going on. Now, due to the rather poor research that went into these articles, YouTubers that are involved with the situation on a ground level, like Sid Alpha, had something to say about it. At the time of this recording, Sid has now made two videos calling out both Destructoid and Ars Technica for their poor research that has gone into the article, and possibly even trying to manipulate the viewpoints on the situation in order to further their own agenda. The articles themselves, like I said, were very short and came across as more editorial pieces rather than news content. In fact, in the Destructoid article, Jonathan Holmes went as far as to call YouTubers opportunistic video game pundits, demonizing Alex Mauer in long-winded, fruitless YouTube rants. Now, it's very easy to see how someone like Sid Alpha, who has been covering the story and has been heavily involved in it, could see that as somewhat of an indirect insult. Now, personally, I also found it in very poor taste, and maybe not as insulting, but rather just hypocritical, considering the last time I was in contact with Destructoid, they did express interest in working with me, largely in part to my YouTube content. But old PattyJack don't work for free, so that ain't gonna happen. Now, these articles were exceptionally poorly written, and I'm not going to dispute that at all, and I think that most of the complaints about them are completely valid. However, now that we've gone over all of this, I want to talk to you about what journalism is, and why it's not as corrupted and awful as people think it is. No, it's exactly as corrupted as it's always been. Again, this is coming from someone who works in the industry and has worked with a variety of different journalists from every different industry under the sun, basically. So this has been going on for a while, but I saw a lot of comments in Sid Alpha's YouTube videos and in a variety of other places as well, and people seem to be blaming journalism as a whole for the bad things that happen in the industry. There is an overwhelming feeling right now that journalists are not to be trusted, and that everyone works for CNN or Fox News or wants to further their own agenda. Now, the fact is that stories like these, or whenever situations happen, they're very few and far between. But in reality, the vast majority of journalists are completely fine, and they try to do their darndest to be as unbiased as possible, and they don't really have a specific agenda they want to push. Well, then why do we keep hearing about all these bad journalists then, and never about the good ones? Well, that's because a good reporter does their job properly, and they pull attention to the story and don't try to further anything else or make stupid mistakes. To quote one of my favorite shows of all time,
"When you do things right, people won't be sure you've done anything at all."
That's what a good journalist does. They draw attention to the story itself rather than what their ideals or opinion is. Unless it's, of course, an editorial. So now let's talk about the problem that people have with CNN, Fox News, and all these other larger news organizations, which is the idea that they have their own agendas, they try to push everything, and they try to sensationalize different news topics. Now, for the record, I completely agree, and that's absolutely what they do on a daily basis. However, while they might have the loudest voice, they are by no means the majority of news in the world. Now, the majority of those working in the media industry are working at that local newspaper that's slowly going out of business because you haven't got a subscription for it. If you don't like CNN, if you don't like Fox News, you should be going and supporting other sources of news that might be either less biased or have less of an agenda than the ones you're currently viewing. Does that excuse CNN or Fox News or whoever the hell else? No, absolutely not. But it does come down to consumers to figure out which news they feel is the most valuable. And if what you want is completely unbiased news, well, you can try, but it's going to be very difficult to find that. Because contrary to popular belief, news has never been, nor will it ever be, unbiased. Reporters aren't robots, and news outlets don't survive on unicorn farts. There's this thing called money that every single business in the world needs to make in order to stay in business. And where do you think that news outlets get their money from? It ain't the government, it ain't unicorn anuses. No, it's way worse, it's from advertising. Whether it be TV, print, radio, or wherever else you get your information from, chances are, there's advertisements running in some way, shape, or form. And advertisers aren't going to pay for a spot on your programming if people aren't tuning in. So what that means is that news organizations need to be able to get an audience, and they need to be able to do that while keeping them interested. And I'm sorry, but reporting 100% facts all the time isn't going to keep people coming back. People want their opinions validated. People want to hear what other people think about every situation. And yes, facts are extremely important, and they should be included in every single article and in the majority of content by these news outlets. But if every news outlet was 100% fact and didn't have a personality of their own, then you'd only have one news outlet. And there's a problem with that, being that if you only have one news outlet and take the entire thing as gospel, who's to know that that one isn't corrupt? And that's the reality. You need different news sources that are reporting different things and have different opinions. That way you can take all of those opinions and then form your own. And again, facts are very important, and they should be included in full in every single article. But the notion that people expect everything to be 100% unbiased isn't really feasible, and it's never been true, not since the beginning of news media. I see a lot of comments and posts saying that they want media to be like the old days with Cronkite and all those guys doing the news, but the fact of the matter is it was just as corrupt back then, except we didn't have the internet, so no one knew when people were being lied to. We're talking about the days of big oil and big tobacco at their height, and if you honestly think that they weren't trying to edit the message or edit the news, well, you're a little bit delusional. Don't even get me started on wartime propaganda that started hundreds of years ago and it continues even today. Now, there are proper journalists that do all of their researching and reporting and try to remain as completely unbiased as possible. This is still the majority of them. That's your local newspaper editor, that's the guy on your radio morning show in your hometown, along with the other 99% of reporters that are simply doing their jobs. Journalism is corrupt, but it's been going on a hell of a lot longer than you think it has. And if you want to find less corrupt news, then start by going and getting a damn subscription to your local newspaper. I mean, I'm sure they don't really have a big agenda to try to convert everyone in your town over to the Republican Party. And as a final point, you guys aren't doing everything wrong. I mean, you should absolutely be pointing out when journalists do stupid things, when they make false quotes or they try to change a story in order to fit their own narrative. Everything that you do when you find out reporters from Destructoid or Ars Technica or CNN or wherever else, whenever they're doing bad things, we need to be talking about it. Because that's your duty as a consumer, is to see everything from different standpoints so you can form your own opinion. If something is wrong, call them out on it and make sure that everyone is doing their jobs properly. Because if there ever comes a day where you take news as 100% gospel or fact, then you need to rethink how that news organization might be affecting you. I am IAmPattyJack. Leave your angry comments below about how I'm a corporate shill for CNN even though I'm Canadian. I'll see you next time.